Welcome to the session about estimations. I want to start with introducing you to the context of and reality of a delivery manager, especially in a B2B implementations. So what that reality looks like. Well, first, me as a delivery manager, I spent my time in two rooms. Room number one is room full of developers. Why? Because I asked them how long it will take to deliver a feature. What I meet or what I see is a resistance. They feel uncertain of how to come up with the numbers. So what I do, I negotiate, I explain. I try to convince them why it is important. And then I spend time in room number two. Room number two, which is full of stakeholders. And what I do, I also try to convince them that the numbers that we came up with actually make sense. What I do, I negotiate again. So I'm in the middle of those two rooms, trying to find an understanding between the two groups. And why is that? What I see often is that developers undervalue or underestimate the value of estimations as such, as an activity. While stakeholders overestimate that value. They treat estimations as commitments. So I'm like Dilber here, trying to balance the message. My name is Zofia Safteruk-Przybysz, and I'm a delivery manager, currently working at Saitora. Saitora is a startup that is delivering and streamlining processes for insurance companies. For the past 15 years, I worked with customers mainly. Over 10 years in technology and in banking sector a lot. And today I want to share with you 5 lessons from my experience of starting the project and being asked this one question, when it will be done. Because I went through multiple dozens of sessions when I had to answer these questions the best to my abilities. I made all the possible mistakes, and I learned from it a lot. And this is what I'm going to share with you today. I also tried to actually see if there are smarter people than I am, because definitely someone tried that before, and they do have probably a good advice of how to run estimation sessions. So I did some research, and here are my 5 Bibles if you need some literature on estimations. 5 books that I always go to and reach out to if I need a little bit of inspiration or I need a different ways of looking at things. Interestingly, all those 5 books give a different advice. Is it a good advice? Yes, it is. Does it give you good estimates? No, it doesn't. And what I found out and what I learned from those books, that we are actually talking not about one thing, which is estimating. We are actually talking about 3 processes: the estimating, the planning, and the forecasting. And this is my lesson number 1. The estimating, planning, and forecasting is actually a cycle. And there are 3 processes that at the end hallucinate about the future. And they are one bigger process. I call this process the agile cycle of planning. Like, if you have a better name, I'm all for it. But I thought that saying all 3 together is a little bit long. So let's look at what that really is. What is estimating? Estimating is gathering information, literally. We do look at historical data if we are lucky, and we have projects that we did in the past and that were similar, or if we develop similar features that we want to do now. Or we have to go and ask our developers in room number 1, and we are asking them for their judgment on how long something will take. And of course, that's not an ideal scenario, because we know about fallacy of estimating, so the phenomenon that says that we are too optimistic about how long something will take. But it's still worth it. Based on that information, we can start setting some objectives. We can start thinking of, okay, so what resources do we need? What phases we can create, potentially. How we can even approach development. And this whole process, that's the second process, which is called planning. But planning would be nothing if it's not validated. So we are validating those plans as we start development. And validation goes, a very good tool or very good process for validating our plans is forecasting. What is forecasting? Forecasting is actually looking at the real data already from our team, our product, our project, and trends that we see. And forecasting is actually an excellent feedback loop, and that helps us improve the estimating and planning. So it's a cycle. We don't do it once, we do it all over. We are learning from that cycle. And as I mentioned, all of those processes still try to answer, or how they hallucinate about the future, but they try to answer those three key questions, which are our typical project constraints. And those questions are when, what, and how much. But I want to ask one more question. I want to ask you that question. Why? Why do we do it? Anyone? Why do we estimate? Why do we try to answer this question when it will be done?
To try and give your stakeholders a target date of delivery.
Yes? Anyone else?
Get a budget.
Get a budget. Anyone else?
There's this saying that it's not the plan that's important, but the planning.
Yeah?
It's more the conversation. Otherwise, you'll be totally flying blind.
Yes?
So you get insights into, is this near, far, somewhere in between.
Yeah. So what do we want from that room number 2 when we are talking to stakeholders is actually what? Make a decision, right? So that whole estimating, planning, and forecasting, because I will be talking about all three, although with the focus on the first one, is actually to support better decision making. But there are 2 ingredients to make that decision better. And those 2 ingredients is not only knowing the cost and the budget, but also understanding the value. And this is lesson number 2 that I want to share with you. When you're in the room with people discussing the estimate, try to think not only about the cost of development, but also the estimation of the value that they potentially see will be gained after we finish development. So how do we quantify value and how do we quantify costs? Let's start with the value first. We can quantify it by simply money. Like we're thinking about revenue increase by X number of money per month or per year. We can think about tax advantages as well. We can express them in the currency, in the money. But we can also look at the value from the perspective of percentages. Like we're gonna be 10% more efficient. That's also an option. There are also less quantifiable ways of estimating the value. It can be also the expert's judgment, and that's absolutely fine. Sometimes it's very difficult to put a value or a number against that value of the feature, for example. But as long as you can put it on a scale and give it some sort of currency, it's fine. The same goes for the costs. With costs, we're probably all more familiar with. I believe a lot of us did estimations in the past. And the costs we do like through budget, effort. That's probably not an exhaustive list. There's probably more examples if you go for it. These are just examples of how we can do it. We look at the duration, effort. Again, we can use story points, although that's questionable. But we can still do that using some abstract sizing. You can use elephant and a mouse. That's fine, as long as you can put them on the scale. So we're looking for a currency for those 2 values. And why? because both of them help us make a decision. And the easiest decision-making matrix is this one. And I've used that a lot in the past with customers when I had to negotiate. In one room and the other room, like in both rooms, really. The room of developers, but mainly in the room of stakeholders. So we're trying to get in the negotiations of the scope and trying to answer the questions of when, what, and how much. We've been using this metrics and putting the features somewhere on the scale of the value and the cost. High value, low cost? Yes, we're doing it. Low value, high cost? No, we don't do it. And then everything in the middle, you actually want to learn more. And I would even say that if they are in a high cost and high value, you may want to plan them better. You may want to go into those like discovery workshops to validate those numbers and that scale you put that feature on. In the low cost, low value, well, you may want to reconsider your options or use it as a filler. And what I mentioned is like you don't really have to be super precise in those estimates. Of course, context matters. In some cases you will have to, but in some cases you don't. And especially when you go to the negotiations, you can think about those estimations as a more like approximation. Because even though this approximation is better than no approximation at all, it still helps to make some conscious decision, proceed with development, and validate. Because again, we're going into the cycle of estimating and validating, right? So when you're looking at the estimates, whether the value or the cost, think about being accurate, but not precise. So don't be like Dilber on the picture here. What does it mean? What's the difference? When you think about, let's give the example of a shooting board. When you think about precision, it's always hitting the same spot. It's always to be really good with the estimation, with the number, and actually being always hitting the bullseye, like here. But to do that, you need a lot of practice, and you need repetitiveness. You need a lot of data points. But you can also be accurate, and accuracy is a degree of correctness. So as long as you stay in the proximity of the bullseye, it kind of gives you a good idea of how long something will take, right? Give you a good idea of the estimate. Well, our stakeholders would probably like this one, but this one is good enough. So we're looking at communicating accuracy now. Once we have went through the exercise of estimating, how do we really communicate that accuracy? And the first one, the easiest one, is probably ranges. And this is what I usually do, especially in the beginning of the project, when we have a very low understanding of the requirements. It's like we go into ranges like 3 to 5 sprints, 100 to 150K, ranges. The second one is certainty level. And this one is more used when you actually can start forecasting. Here I'm presenting a screenshot from a website, focusedobjective.com. There is a free spreadsheet. You can plug your data from your project, from your team, and simply run a Monte Carlo simulation. That will give you more or less this outcome of how long something will take with a certainty level. It's free, so there is no excuse not to use it. And at the very beginning of your implementation, that certainty level will be much lower, and your ranges will be probably extremely high. And this is true. This will be true for every complex software development. Unless you repeat something multiple times, and it looks exactly the same with the same team, then yeah, you may be more precise. But at the very beginning, usually what we look at is a very, very big range. But over time, again, we look at the cycle, planning, estimating, and forecasting. We're learning more. we're discovering more. And we're telling each other a story about what happened, right? We're going into the retrospective and we are discussing, okay, we learned this one. This is how we can proceed in the future. This is what changed. And based on that learning and that experience, we are also adapting our future. We're thinking, okay, so now we know we probably need to maybe find different resources. And because this whole software development is very complex, there are a lot of moving parts, we're trying to simplify it also for our stakeholders and for ourselves. We're trying to put it in a sort of a storyline. And estimations are a tool to help us tell that story. Because every time we're looking at the past of what we estimated and the future of what we think will look like. So that's my lesson number 4. Estimations are a tool to tell a story. And because we're looking at the business-to-business environment, I will tell you a story of a business-to-business delivery. So how does this story look like? Well, we're setting the scene first, right? So we have salespeople giving the first estimate. Probably it's in sort of order of magnitude for the customers to make a decision of whether they want to progress with us or not. That may not be actually the main driver for the decision, but we're still going into that discussion. Later on, there's probably a bid involved. So we have now more understanding of the requirements, and we're still, before signing the contract, trying to get a more accurate understanding of the numbers. From there, we're going to discovery workshops. And in the discovery workshops, well, we learned that it's not as straightforward as we initially thought, or what the sales said. And we're reviewing the estimations again and the plan together again. That's another point when we actually run estimations. And again, we do it when we start delivery. Now we can look more into forecasting. And we can again rewrite the future based on what we've learned. And then we have what? A delivery issue. Like, I don't know, a project that didn't have a delivery issue, whatever that issue is. It could be COVID. It could be extra scope. It could be someone very crucial in our team that just got permanently sick. Hopefully not, but that could also happen. So we're looking at options like, okay, so what do we do right now? If we know we're not going to hit our targets, we're not going to hit our budget or our deadline, what do? We go into the negotiation table again and try to estimate. Hopefully, we're going to reach the agreement, and then we're going into the culmination and our MVP and our go-live release, and beyond that. And beyond that, we again go into the estimations and trying to find a way to discuss and decide of what we're going to do next, which features we're going to do next. We're going to go again to the negotiation table, look at the matrix, at the number of value, at the number of estimate, to move on. So what is the role of estimates in all of that? Well, estimations are actually helping us to start the relationship with the customer. I don't know, at least like if you guys do, please share your experience, but I don't know the customer that has signed a contract without getting any numbers in the beginning, right? Then we initiate the work. Usually that work is initiated in a project setup. Those that worked with corporates, you have probably very good understanding of the CapEx versus OpEx. So we get the CapEx budget. We have to work with this one before we move to the OpEx and a slightly different way of approaching delivery and estimations. We have to manage expectations of stakeholders. Like, imagine you have 2 different organizations working completely differently, people who never worked with each other. You have to have a conversation to understand how you're going to achieve the same goals, like how you're going to move into the same direction. So you use estimations as a tool to manage expectations of stakeholders, but also developers. And you start building that understanding of the ways of working. That takes time. And that should also be, by the way, factored in your estimations. And through estimations as well, and the tools that we are using, and there are many different tools. Again, I'll advise that look into the books that I recommended. They give a lot of good techniques. But through that tool, we can also build agile maturity with the customer. And if you worked with enterprise, you know that usually when they start working with startups like go very super agile, they go more into this Monte Carlo type of estimations. Well, enterprises are not yet there. So you're looking for the context and trying to use estimations as well as a way to help them build a story and help them gain that maturity levels that you would like to have in that relationship. And hopefully, through a good approach and a good conversation around the estimations, you also build trust with the customer and continuously improve. And I said it's a business-to-business story, but actually when we think about it, it's a team-to-team. And if it's team-to-team, it's human-to-human. So when I'm in the room number 1, what do I have? I have a fear. Fear of commitment, fear of the pressure of delivery with developers. And then when I'm in the room number 2, and I'm with the stakeholders, sometimes there is people upset or uncertain about the future. So what I do see in those conversations and in those rooms are emotions. And that's a hard truth. Estimations can be emotional. Why? Well, there are so many reasons, depending on which room you're in. But basically, it's a pressure to meet expectations. And whether you're a stakeholder and you want to meet expectations and help the organization because you have a commitment towards your stakeholders, maybe board, maybe sponsors, maybe executives. There's also a pressure in the development room because they do want the best for their customer and for that customer's customers as well, right? You have a pressure to find consensus, so you go to that negotiation table and you're like, okay, we have to find a way to move forward together. We have to negotiate on the budget, on the cost, on the scope. Some people may think that this project is actually the next step in their career. Maybe it's their next promotion. So they will be super passionate about doing it on budget. But then there will be people in the room that you will have and you will discuss the scope, and you know that someone else cares about the budget, so you want to cut scope, but they are super passionate about the scope. Their feature, their process, their thing is the most amazing, the most needed for their customers. They want it. They want it in MVP, they want it now. And you have those two people that you have to put in the room together and just talk to each other. But you will have those emotions. There will be this fear of missing out. If it's not in MVP, it's not being delivered. I've seen it many, many times. You will also have a fear of commitment, especially in the room number 1 with developers. They will be afraid to tell you the numbers, because how can you tell numbers sometimes from a one-liner? And they don't want to not deliver on that commitment. And of course, you will have people who have previous experiences and opinions about how estimations should be run. So that happened to me, if I go to the room and I start talking Monte Carlo, I see like blank pages, like blank faces, nothing. So I have to start talking about like, okay, person days, right? Might be not ideal in certain situations, but it's not about the number. It's about the conversation that you are having in the room and managing people's emotions. So how we do it? What can we do? First of all, it's about empathy and understanding. It may not be extremely agile. Well, yeah, life happens. Delivery happens. But you have to look at the problems or knowledge that that person has that you may not yet have, and understand where they are coming from. provide that supportive environment for them to speak out, for them to write all the 100 assumptions if it's a developer and they give you a number. Like, write them down. Make sure that they have that security and safety that it will not be used against them. Then when you are in the room of stakeholders, try to educate them. Like, you will have that list of assumptions, great, but like, say something 7 times if you have to, for them to understand where those limitations are. And explain to them, like, this is a cycle, this is our first attempt. We did it based on one-liners, but we will do it for you again, and we will explain, we will write a story, we will tell you what's changed and how the new future looks like. So we will also help you to tell the story to your stakeholders within your organization, your board members. Be transparent. I think it's crucial to make sure that people know how you came up with the estimations, and also that you may be wrong, simply wrong, because you probably are. And from us as a delivery managers or product owners or scrum master or whatever our role is, if we are in those 2 rooms and we have to negotiate, there are two crucial skills. Learn how to manage conflict and learn how to have a difficult conversation. And I think someone here mentioned my favorite quote that I want to leave you with at the very end, that summarizes the whole talk. Oh, yeah, I will do that in a second. There's one more thing that I want to share with you. The reality. The reality will still be the same. Developers undervalue the estimations, and stakeholders probably overvalue them and treat them as commitment. And that's fine. That will happen. Life is messy. But I want to show you that estimations are not only a conflict thing, they're also a collaboration tool. They help you have those conversations. They help you build that story, and that help you find the story for the future when you and your customer are going together, not against each other. And that famous quote, that planning is everything and plans are nothing, that summarizes this whole talk. And with this one, I would like to thank you for coming. I would love to connect with you via LinkedIn. I don't have my website yet. This is a URL, not a name. So just in case someone mentioned that it's not very clear, this is a URL. If you just type it in the browser, it will send you to my LinkedIn page.